The Power Factor Show. Episode 93.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland and Hodgdon, the gunpowder people.
So welcome back to Power Factor.
I'm Rick.
I'm Steve. You haven't seen me for a while. I've been on vacation, so to speak. Actually, literally.
Right.
And that's kind of the focus of today's episode. But it's not just any vacation that I went on. This is actually something that I've been planning on for about the last 2 or 3 years. Because this year I turned a certain significant numerical value. We'll just call it. It's a golden anniversary. So yes, I turned 50 this year.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm here all week. Don't forget to tip wages.
Try the veal, right?
Yeah. So I've been planning this trip for quite some time, and I've always had a desire to go back to the East Coast and see a lot of the old original gun manufacturing companies that are back there. So we're talking Colt, Winchester, Remington, wanted to go see Smith & Wesson, didn't make it, but also Springfield Armory, the real Springfield Armory, not the Springfield Armory by name in Illinois. But to also add to the trip, my wife and I are big baseball fans, so we thought, well, while we're doing this, let's see if we can hit as many baseball parks as we can while we were back there. So initially we had planned to fly into D.C. and fly out of Boston. That got changed around a little bit, and we flew into D.C., but we were going to try and hit the Phillies. We were going to try and hit Mets, the new Yankee Stadium. We've been to the old Yankee Stadium before, and then Fenway, and then also Camden Yards. Unfortunately, because of logistics and timing, the problem was that all those teams were in their respective stadiums during about a 5 or 6 day period, and it just became obvious that this is not going to work. So what we were end up doing is hitting Camden Yards in Baltimore at the beginning when these teams were in their neighborhoods or at their fields, and then hitting Fenway, which has always been a desire to go to Fenway and see that. Fenway is a very old park. It's celebrating their 100th year anniversary this year, and I could tell you, sitting in those seats, that I could feel 100 years in my butt by the time that game was over, because they are not, I have never sat anywhere I have not been very comfortable before. You have no leg room, and they're wood slats, and it's not very comfortable. So someday we'll make it to the Phillies. We did make it to Philadelphia, but we didn't see a game, and we'll make it to New York sometime and go see the Mets play. But at any rate, I did make it to Cooperstown. That was a very special thing. I've always wanted to go there and see the Hall of Fame. We did that. Wanted to go up and see Remington and Ilion, which is only about 20 or 30 miles from Cooperstown. But unfortunately, we got into Cooperstown on Friday, and we were leaving for Hartford on Sunday, and it just didn't work out that we were going to be able to see Remington because they were closed over the weekend, so didn't do that. And the other thing that we kind of threw in there at the last minute, which was actually a lot of fun and very interesting, is that we decided to add battlefields, Civil War and Revolutionary War, and it turns out War of 1812 battlefields to the entire trip. So started out hitting Fredericksburg, and then Chancellorsville, and then from there the next day we went down to Yorktown, which is actually the site of Revolutionary and Civil War. So we went to Yorktown, spent the day in Yorktown there, and then headed to Frederick, Maryland, which is the scene of, starts with an A.
Antietam?
Thank you. Yeah, Antietam. And then from Antietam, we headed to Gettysburg and saw Gettysburg. So that was a very interesting part of the trip also, of just literally seeing all these battlefields that you have heard about before, and literally standing in the same places and seeing everything that had happened in those locations. It's really, especially at Gettysburg, and I'll say that Gettysburg is a bit over commercialized from the standpoint relative to the other battlefield museums that are there. but it is very well done, and you can literally stand on one side, on the Confederate side, and 3/4 of a mile away was the Union side, which they were both firing cannons at each other, and that's where Pickett's charge came from. And you can literally really get a perspective of what it must have been like as you would have, and as they said, it was literally a line of soldiers a mile wide coming straight at them. Yeah. And just being mowed down with cannon fire and everything. And a lot of them actually made it up to where the Union troops were on the opposite side, and you saw both of it. There was a point there called the Angle, which is apparently where hand-to-hand combat occurred. And you can stand there and you can really get a feel for it. So
does it look pretty much like it did back in the day? I mean, they tried to preserve it as opposed to...
in fact, they have said that, and especially at Gettysburg, is that they have tried to literally maintain the same appearance that it was back in 1863, if my history is correct, and it probably isn't, but we're going to
63 is right.
Yeah. So literally, like, the clumps of trees are the same.
Right. Wasn't the battle fought for a clump of trees? Wasn't that actually a...
Well, there was a clump of trees, but it was a reference point, I think, from the Confederate side.
They have a little round top and all these different... The cornfield.
Right. And it's interesting you mention that, because we went up to Little Round Top, and you look down, there's a thing which was called, I think, the Slaughter Field or something like that. And it's really kind of an eerie place. There's, I think, it was a Devil's... Oh, geez, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, saw so many things over a very quick period that it almost starts turning into a bit of a blur at all these different locations. So I would say that if you get the chance to go back there and see these places, it really is well worth your time to go up and see that. Because it is really quite interesting. So
I lived in Boston for 5 years.
That's right, yeah.
And so I have been to Springfield Armory, and I've been to Fenway a few times. But I kind of kicked myself that one of my coworkers was from Tennessee, and he was a huge Civil War buff, and he had visited all of the battlefields in the South, but he'd never been to any of the ones in the northern part of the country, and yet... Even though we worked together for like 3 years, we never left town together, never looked at anything. And so I kind of kicked myself that as much stuff as I did see while I lived there, that was one of the things I missed was Civil War and Revolutionary War battlefield. So definitely, if you have a chance to go back, if you go back for a baseball game, check out Springfield Armory. If you go back for Springfield Armory, check out a baseball game.
There you go. Yeah, that works out well. And we also, actually, I was mentioning, or forgot to mention, we hit Fort McHenry, which was in Baltimore, which was technically War of 1812. And we all know the significance of Fort McHenry.
The last claiming.
There you go. Yeah. And it was interesting because at the time there was 13 stars and stripes on the flag at that time during, obviously, Fort McHenry, or during the the War of 1812. And it's interesting, at Baltimore, the flag they fly is the flag from that period.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems fitting.
Yeah.
Actually, I wonder if it's 15 stars. I think it's 15 stars and 13 stripes at 1812 period, but at any rate. So it was a really fun trip from that standpoint. But to make it relative to this program, I decided to hit Springfield Armory. Went through that. You'll see pictures from that. We'll talk about that for a little bit. Also went through the original grounds at Winchester, long since vacated many years ago, and I'm sure you all know the Winchester story of them leaving New Haven. Winchester is still kind of coming back now, but certainly not at New Haven. I don't recall exactly where that plant is, but it's down south, South Carolina.
They're building, I think, everything in the FNH plant, which is down in, like South Carolina or something. Yeah.
Right. Then I went to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to the original site of Remington UMC, and that was a really interesting neighborhood, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. There's a lot of interesting stories behind that. And then finally to Hartford to see Colt, and it's always been a desire of mine to make it there. I don't know why, but I've always been fascinated with these old factories and kind of what they represent from a time period long ago to where we are today. So I really like to go back, and to me it's always been very interesting to see this as a part of history. So, but before we get into that, I think we need to announce the winner of the last contest giveaway.
Right, and the question for the contest giveaway was, when is a shooter, USPSA rule, when is a shooter allowed to rearrange the range surface? And that comes under Rule 4.5, and the competitor, 4.5.1, the competitor must not interfere with the range surface, natural foliage, construction props, or other range equipment, including targets, target stands, and target activators, at any time. Violations may incur 1 procedural penalty per occurrence at the discretion of the range officer. With the exception of 4.5.1.1, a competitor is allowed to move stone, sand, or other loose material at the starting position for the purposes of achieving level and stable footing. And locally, I find the things that I have to move most often is shotgun wads.
Wasn't me.
But there's nothing in the rule about shotgun wads.
No.
Anyway, so according to our new prize awarding process, rather than just going with the first person who hits the send button on Monday to determine who the winner is, we decided to throw it open to anybody who in the first week that the question's been thrown out there, their names will all be thrown into a pool, and then we'll do a random drawing.
So I think we had 6 right answers if I remember right.
Yes, that's my understanding. Apparently, among his other duties, Larry has taken on the prize master responsibilities.
Good. Excellent.
He's tallying the votes and everything. So according to Larry, our winner is Bryce Liggett. So Bryce, apparently we don't have any contact info for you. I don't know how your name came to us. I guess it wasn't an email or whatever. But anyway, so send us an email or contact us, and we will fire off your mug and shirt and hat. And thanks for watching.
I also probably should point out here is that when you guys are answering these questions, make sure you're using the most current rule book, because one of the responses that we got was
Ask
incorrect.
Colonel Cooper, and that was correct in 1976, but it doesn't work anymore.
But they referred to the 2001 rule book, which I think has gone through 2 or maybe 3.
What are we on now, to 2008 or 2005
2010.
or something? No, but I mean, in terms of the current rule book, is it 2008 or?
No, 2010.
Oh, it came out just 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's newer than the one I have.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of changes made to it. I think it was the stuff for
They
production
added
and
single
stuff like
stack
that.
or whatever.
No, I think it was a change. I think it was some of the fine detail changes for production and some clarifications of this, that, and the other thing. It wasn't a lot, but it was some stuff.
All right.
But at any rate, so when you answer these questions, make sure you're using the most current rule book, and you can get or download the most current rule book from USPSA. And if you guys come up with IDPA questions, I presume you can probably download the most current rule book from them too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, but the IDPA questions will probably be so subjective that I'll just have to decide what the correct answer is. So, anyway, so Steve, on with the tour.
Okay, so we're going to start out here with Springfield Armory, which is coincidentally in Springfield, Massachusetts. Springfield Armory started in, I believe it was 1777.
It's the oldest name in American firearms.
That's true. And it actually started out as Springfield Arsenal and later became Springfield Armory. And Rick, do you know the difference between, actually this should make this a trivia question, but we're not going to.
Okay.
Do you know the difference between an arsenal and an armory?
The difference between an arsenal and an armory? I do not.
Really?
No.
I figured you would.
What is the difference?
An arsenal is where they store firearms.
An armory is where they make firearms.
Right.
So, interesting. So Springfield Armory must have been both then.
Well, at the time, it was actually Springfield Arsenal. And
at the time, now we're back in the 18th century.
What, 1777?
That would be the 18th century.
And in the U.S., and this is kind of an interesting point in history here, but in the U.S., there were 2 arsenals. There was Springfield Armory, which is the oldest, and then there was Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Springfield Arsenal became Springfield Armory, I think, around 1795 when they actually started manufacturing firearms. But during the Civil War, the Union troops destroyed Harper's Ferry because they didn't want it falling into the Confederate hands so that they could actually manufacture firearms.
Right.
However, the Confederates, being creative, went and after the place burned down, were able to get all the equipment, what was left, take it away, and manufactured some firearms anyway. So, at any rate, Harper's Ferry was the second armory. Springfield was the first one. And what is actually left now of the grounds, and you can see here in the picture,
soccer field.
Is this building here was the actual arsenal where they stored firearms, not where they actually manufactured them. The manufacturing was done down closer to the river because they were using the river to power, at that time, the turbines to run the machines to build firearms. Right now, a lot of this property has been donated to Massachusetts, and they have a Massachusetts technology school that is there also on the property. So, at any rate,
and just I've probably said at least once already the oldest name in American firearms, which is the slogan used by Springfield Inc., which sells their firearms with the Springfield Armory logo.
Right.
And they don't make much of a point of talking about the fact that they literally are the oldest name, but they have absolutely no connection to Springfield Armory.
Other than by name.
Springfield Inc., of course, is in Illinois. Springfield Armory is in Springfield, Massachusetts. And all the guns that you buy that are stamped with Springfield Armory, most of them are made in Croatia and Brazil. And that's not to say they're not excellent products, but just don't confuse the two. I've heard people say things like, when I was in the Army, I shot a Springfield, and now I'm proud to have a new Springfield. Well, your new Springfield was made by Imbel in Brazil. So, but anyway, so this is the Springfield Armory.
Right. So, sign here in front of the place with the direction to the museum, just in case you get lost.
Right, exactly.
So the next picture here is a picture of what it looked like during the time when it was active. And you'll find here that the manufacturing techniques that were done at Springfield Armory were really no different than were being done at Colt and also at Winchester, and that they would have usually a steam-powered engine that would drive a large, basically group of shafts throughout the factory, and they would bring a belt down from that shaft down to the machinery, and that's how they basically ran everything. And the same thing is done again at Winchester.
I suspect Ford Motor Company probably looked pretty much the same way.
Back in the day, yeah. I mean, anybody who was doing things with machinery, that's basically how they distributed power throughout the company. So walking in here, the museum is kind of separated into two parts: weapons, which you'll see here, and then also the other part is kind of like the manufacturing techniques and things like that during the period that Springfield Armory was active. And for the most part, I focused on the weapons side of things here. I mean, yes, the manufacturing and whatnot is interesting, but I had a limited amount of time here, and I decided to make the most of it. So this is actually a really interesting item. It is a 1911 that was made by Springfield as an experiment purely out of brass that was die cast, and it was just again a one-off experiment that they did. They refer to it as the golden gun, so to speak. I don't know how this would have actually held up in testing or anything like that. There's not a whole lot more about it other than this. Apparently done in 1932. But they have a lot of interesting, one-off things here at Springfield Armory, in addition to a lot of other things also. But there are a lot of experimentals here that you'll see throughout the company or throughout the museum. This one I thought was really interesting. You've got a kind of a name for this. It looks like a combination of a Colt version of a Liberator,
exactly.
But a 1911 instead.
Yeah.
So again, this is an experimental here that Colt had done. They said that apparently less than 20 of these were made, and really what drove it is that after World War II, the Army was looking for a lighter weight version of the 1911, and while they were able to build these things out of aluminum, Colt experimented with some made from stamped sheet metal. Probably the same idea from like the M3 grease gun or something like that, or the Liberator. But I saw this and I thought, what in the world is that when it walked in and saw that?
You can see the locking lug forward of the ejection port, and it really, this configuration is very much like a 1911.
It's very much like a 1911. But then on the other hand, it's very much not like a 1911 either.
It looks sort of like a steampunk 1911.
Yeah, it does. Or some almost like a toy back from the 60s or something like that. Of you're expecting it to shoot darts out of it or something like that.
Gun or something.
Yeah, a squirt gun or something. But apparently 20 of these were made and obviously didn't go anywhere. And I would probably say thank you that they didn't, because I can't imagine that. So imagine if somebody showed up like that at an IPSC match. You're probably like, what? So I think this has to be the most pimped out Liberator that I've ever seen in my life. I had never seen a Liberator this highly polished.
Is it a special presentation version or something?
Yeah. They say here that roughly 1 million of them were made. But we all know the story about the Liberators. But when I saw this and the high polish of it, and this happens to be, I think, right under that stamped 1911 Colt experimental, I had to shoot a picture of that. So the next picture here is just, there's a lot of different display cases here throughout the museum, and unfortunately that kind of made it a little bit difficult to shoot pictures because the lighting was such that it was just kind of dark enough to not be able to shoot with natural lighting, but on the other hand it was too dark that I had to use a flash and you get bounce back. But this is just kind of a representation of a lot of the different firearms that are here. Muskets, as you can see here, a Grand. Nothing really special about this.
It's an M14 on the top.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is an M14.
This looks like a hammer.
You know what I think this is I think this represents basically the beginning to the end of what Springfield was making. So you have the original...
well, I doubt they made any matchlocks.
No.
I mean, it kind of looks like general development.
But this looks like possibly a trap door.
Yeah, I can't tell. I thought it looked like, when it was big and large, I thought it looked like a double barrel. Oh, that's a Spencer.
Is it? Okay, yeah. Spencer carbine.
Yeah, and on top of that is looks like, can't really tell. I can't tell if that's one hammer, two hammer.
Yeah.
And then 14. And then I also saw Colt. Looks like Colt Dragoon here on the right, lower right, below the little placard.
Right. So next one that we're looking at here is, now what do you exactly refer to this as?
An organ of muskets.
Right.
And it's, I think that's how they stored them and wheeled them around. It's like a big cart. And it's got I don't know if they told you how many, some hundreds.
I looked at this up close and it's 5 deep.
Okay, so it's hundreds of, I think they're 1861 Springfield Armory muskets, as were the standard issue for the Union Army during during this American Civil War. And so it's literally hundreds of these muskets that are in this cart, essentially, that would allow them to roll it around in the factory. And it was just and they all look like they're unfired. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's just like they were probably put away. They were excess to use. And 100 years later, what are we going to do with them? And it just makes this beautiful display. And that was probably when I lived in Boston. That's one place I did go 20 years ago now. And that was the part of the whole museum, I think, that impressed me the most.
So that's an interesting point. Has the museum changed much when you were there 20 years ago versus
the pictures look pretty much like what I remember. I mean, they may have updated the cases and stuff that the guns are in, but it looks pretty much like I remember from 20 years ago.
Right. This next picture, and I'll admit it, I've always liked the Walther PPK. Maybe it has to do with James Bond, but I've always liked the PPK, and someday maybe I'll own one, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But right above it here is also a Walther P38, which is just a really nice pistol also. So at any rate, I had to shoot a picture of this. But in the display cases, there are a lot of different, Allied firearms, Axis arms, I mean everything, machine guns, rifles, everything, World War I, World War II. So it's not just purely Springfield firearms that are there. There's something from everywhere, literally.
If you're a fan of the double action, single action, which we've mentioned before on the show, in the context of the different competitive divisions and how like the production division in USPSA and the stock service pistol division in IDPA required double action triggers. Well, the PPK and the P38 were two of the original double action pistols. I think the Walther PP was the original double action, single action, where you had the long double action pull on the first shot and then the short single action shot after that slide had recocked it. And the whole family of double action pistols we see today originated with the Walther PP series of pistols in the 1920s.
So did the PP come out before the P38?
Yeah, the PP came out in 1929.
Oh, all right.
So it was and the P38 actually had some, it was the final development. There was a gun called the Hearst pistol that came out a couple of years prior to that, and then the P38 was like the final development of that was adopted in 38.
So now we're getting into Grands, and this is Grand number 81, and as they said here, if I remember it correctly, this is the very first Grand that was built fully as a production rifle that did not require hand fabrication, if you want to call it that, of certain parts. It was all built on machines.
The M1 had a very long gestation period between the time it was introduced and it was actually in full service was like 6 or 8 years.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they were fiddling with the gas system, and then they were having problems with failures to feed, and they were doing constant kind of fiddling and refining of it. And then not really, I think, until about 1940 was it really, even though it had been adopted in 1936, not until about 1940 was it actually kind of fully functional and ready for prime time. Oh, and before we go on, because I know we're going to say Garand over and over again.
Garand or Garand?
Garand is apparently how Mr. Garand pronounced it.
Okay.
Everybody, I think 99% of the people I hear call it a Garand.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You'll excuse us if you're a name stickler for pronunciation.
Or French Canadian, probably.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's John C. right there.
There he is,
right
yeah.
there.
So this next one here is literally beginning to end of the M1. It's the first production M1 and the very last one. So the first one being 81, the last one at the bottom there is 6 million something or other. The one right below the top is 1 million, then 2 million, then 3 million, and 1 million apparently was given, serial number 1 million was given to Mr. Garand. Yeah.
Yes.
And then has since come back to the museum. So, and unfortunately, this picture is kind of dark. I apologize for that. So the next one here is a display case of a lot of one-offs. There's a book here which explains literally what each gun was, what it represents, what was unique about it. A lot of the guns in here are all serial number 1. But they're all pretty much experimentals. You've got guns with folding stocks, you've got short-barreled, carbine versions of them, everything. But it's kind of interesting just to see all the different experimentals that they had done over time.
Apparently, one of the things that held it up was that it had originally been designed to shoot a 20.276-inch cartridge.
Right.
And then Douglas MacArthur said, look, we've got millions and millions of rounds of 30-06 ammo left over from the Great War.
Right.
So let's go ahead and convert that thing to 30-06. And, of course, then that held up the adoption and production of it, converting it over to shoot the new cartridge, or the old cartridge for which it wasn't designed.
Right. And this is just another example of serial number 1 of one of the Garands in the display case. This next one here I thought was kind of an interesting picture. It's just kind of a general overall, view of all the different parts in an M1. I just thought that it was kind of an interesting picture there of seeing all the different components made up of the M, or makes up the M1. Excuse me?
Everything clean.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was an M14. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting. This is an experimental that Springfield was working on between the building of, or what was then at that time being built by Colt of the AR, and then Springfield was obviously working on the M14. So this was a full-off experimental called the SPIW, and I guess the features of this was that it had a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. It was also a rifle.
Can opener.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Wash dishes, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Right. And I was telling Rick here, I remember as a kid in the 60s that there was something called a Johnny OMA. It was a Johnny One-Man Army, and it was something very similar to this. It was this like toy rifle. It was huge. I remember my cousin had it, and I was over at his place, and I remember my mom has a picture of me, probably about 4 or 5 years old, holding this thing. But it had like the grenade launcher, and it had the rifle, and it had, I think, like a pistol built into the fore end somehow and everything. But I saw this, and when I saw this in the display case, it's like, oh my God, that OMA came from this. So, yeah. Next picture here is the M14, and then an 03 Springfield, kind of showing the lineage of the rifle over time. So this next one here is another experimental that actually John Garand was building here, or creating toward the end of, I guess, his career. It was a bullpup design, attempting to be lightweight with a high rate of fire. And this thing is really in my mind, kind of futuristic looking.
It looks almost like an air rifle.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't expect the gas cylinder to be surrounding the barrel, but just the effect of it looks sort of like an air rifle.
It's interesting. It also has what it looks like an M4 adjustable stock on the end of it.
Well, in the rear sight, I mean, maybe the rear sight looks like the rear sight, I think, on what was called the FG-42, which was a special like paratrooper thing that the Germans introduced, kind of a sort of an assault rifle, but kind of more like a sort of like a BAR kind of a thing, not really a rifle, not really a machine gun. And some Swiss rifles have a rear sight like that, kind of an interesting. It just kind of sticks up above the top of the receiver like that.
Yeah. This picture here is the 03, the M1, and the M14. I just thought it was a good kind of collection of all three rifles that Springfield manufactured. And that covers all of the Springfield Armory photos. So I think next here we'll go on to Winchester. So Winchester, New Haven, Connecticut. Winchester was literally started in, I think it's 1870 when they built this plant, or this factory here, I should say. And was active, I believe, now I don't recall when Winchester officially left New Haven, but it wasn't too many years ago, to be honest.
No, I was going to say like 2005, but it might have even been after that.
Right.
Because I remember all the hand-wringing over no more 1894s, no more M70s.
Yep, yeah. So this picture here is literally the cornerstone of Winchester, the main entrance at the time to Winchester. Winchester actually spanned a very large area in this neighborhood, so to speak. This building is now on the National Historic Register. It's interesting. It's on Winchester Avenue, as you can see there on the signpost, which I thought was kind of nice. The plan is, and I talked to the property owners here, and the plan is that they're going to, I guess, turn this into condos at some point and resurrect it. So I think that's a really good thing. I like to see that. It really kind of disturbs me when they go in there and completely level a factory, which, speaking of that, we'll see the Remington photos here of what they've done there. Remington does not have much of the time is not in Remington's favor, at least the buildings in Bridgeport, because they're going to be gone here very soon. In fact, most all of them are. So it's kind of, this picture here is actually, again, right there at the front of the building looking up the street. The building here, actually, on the left-hand side of the photo, you can see was actually also Winchester property. And at the time, or I should say back when it was in full production, you'll see this picture a little bit later here coming up, but that area to the left there was actually a very large part of their manufacturing facility. Across the street from Winchester is a Yale medical building. The property that Winchester is on now is very close to being bordered by Yale, and in some cases is actually owned by Yale. So Yale Medical Building here is right across. They have a bunch of old photos of Winchester back in the day. And again, you can see here of the shaft drive and the belt system coming down to all the different machinery. I don't know when this photo was taken. It doesn't really look like it's too old, so to speak. But the one thing you're going to notice here throughout all these photos, and I don't know what the significance is, but they've gone and put somebody's head on a body throughout all these pictures here. So you'll see him pop up. It's just kind of in the background here. It's kind of funny, but at any rate. Next photo here is, again, the very front of the building. Don't know what the time frame of this is, but looking at the people's clothing, I would probably say it's, women's suffrage movement.
It's probably 100 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks like it's possibly the 1910s or teens or whatever during that period. Next photo here is, again, now this is in the front corner there, looking at that same street we saw before. Looking at the cars, I would guess this is either the 40s or the 50s, but all that property to the left there is Winchester. They have like what appears to be a sky bridge going over from one side to the other. And next photo here this is actually a really good picture, represents Winchester in 1876. Lower left-hand corner here is, again, the front cornerstone that we've seen in the earlier pictures, the ones that I have and the ones in their documentation here. But you can kind of get a feel for this here, and then you can see, obviously, that they have expanded more back and to the left here in later times. And in fact, this next photo here, you can really get a feel for just exactly how much expansion they've gone through. Again, the cornerstone is right there in the middle where you can see the flag, and then the manufacturing back behind that. And this is the last photo here. Again, this is that same building now looking down the street. Again, I mean, there's nothing really major significant about this, but again, it's just kind of, to me, it's just interesting to look at these old buildings and kind of think about things or the way they were. Which actually kind of interesting to me is that these, I don't know if they're high tension wires or what they were doing back then or whatever, but you'll see a lot of these over these old buildings of these scaffolding or whatever you want to call it. I guess it's not really scaffolding, but on tops of these buildings for routing wires around. So I think next here, and we'll make it the last part of this episode, is Remington UMC. Remington was in Bridgeport, Connecticut back in the early 1910s, and they were at actually two different locations about 5 blocks apart from each other. One part was roughly 13 buildings interconnected, and that's where they were apparently building the 1911s for World War I. And at the same time, about 5 blocks away was the ammunition plant. And this picture here is one of the last surviving buildings. Unfortunately, I should say the location that is the 5 blocks away where the 13 buildings were interconnected and they were building 1911s have been completely leveled. And in fact, they just leveled the last building this summer, so that's completely gone. The last picture here of the sequence, you'll see that of what's left of it, or I should say what's not left of it. This picture here is of a shot tower, and a shot tower is what they used, and is actually still being used in a lot of cases, when they were making lead shot for shotgun shells. And what they would do is they would take molten lead and from a high level pour it through a strainer, and the lead would then go through the strainer, create and free fall through air and create spherical balls, and then hit a vat of water at the bottom and then immediately cool, creating lead shot. Years ago, I think it was the History Channel did a ghost hunter series or something like that, and did a segment here on this building, or the buildings here in this location. The story goes is that, as you would expect with any ammunition plant, there's been numerous explosions and whatnot over the years where people have been killed. The other unfortunate accident that happened at this location, which is documented, is that 2 people apparently, I don't know if at the same occasion or separate occasions, but fell into a vat of liquid molten lead and instantly died. So the History Channel decided they were going to do a thing on ghosts here, and they, spent the night in this building, or the buildings around here. And I got to give it to them for having the courage to do that, because Rick's laughing here.
It sounds like the Bridgeport factory would be a great place to get ideas for IDPA stages.
Yeah.
If you want your bad part of town, this is apparently where you'd go.
This is a really, really bad part of town. 1 block away from here was a memorial to somebody who was shot and killed, with a sign that said, "Stop the violence, stop the needless killings," whatnot. I decided that I was not getting out of the car in this neighborhood. It was just not a good neighborhood to go walking.
How close to a shot tower do you really have to be to get a good picture of it?
Yeah, apparently just about this far away, and that was it. So I selectively shot some pictures here from the car just to kind of get a feel for it. This next picture here is, again, from inside the car. And I should mention I was being watched this whole entire time by people on their doorsteps. So I really didn't feel too comfortable about getting out and doing anything more than just, taking some pictures in the car and then getting out of here. So picture here of a building. Next picture is, again, this, a lot of these buildings all look like this, and this was particularly really bad in this area. I mean, the Colt buildings that we'll see later on, the Winchester buildings, yes, there are a lot of broken windows, but in this case here, I think every single window has been busted out, and they're literally just brick foundations with the wind blowing through a lot of it. Not really an attractive place, a lot of rust, really dilapidated area. My understanding is that this property right now is that they're trying to get it leveled as a hazard. as in a safety hazard, because apparently there have been numerous fires, and they don't know how the fires have, maybe the ghosts have started the fires, I don't know, but apparently just this last summer there was a fire that happened there again. And
an empty brick building.
Yeah. Who'd have thunk? So, of course, they send the fire department out to put it out, and they're saying, why bother? Let it burn. Rather than risking some firefighter's life to go and save a building that is completely, a mess, the people feel just, tear it down and get rid of it. Unfortunately, the company that owns it has filed bankruptcy, so now it's kind of stuck in court that, who owns it, who can legally do what to it. Right. So, at any rate, this last picture here is what is left of the of Remington where they built the guns, which you can see now. It looks literally like a big parking lot, and I don't know what they plan to do with it, but it's gone.
Doesn't look even flat enough for autocross.
Not really, yeah. So that's it. I also hit Colt. That was really a main highlight for me of hitting Colt, historic Colt in Hartford. But we're going to save that for the next episode, which I think you're really going to like, because we've got a very, very special episode coming up here. Should we even hint at it?
You better hint. You want people to come back.
Yeah. We're going to go through a tour of the Colt factory. One of our viewers, and we'll get to that in the following episode, we found out works for Colt and specially arranges for us. So it's always been something, again, like I mentioned. I mean, before I wanted to see Colt, the original Colt, see the buildings. But then when this opportunity came up, I couldn't believe it. It's almost like, a once in a lifetime thing. And for my birthday, I thought that was pretty cool. So we have an episode dedicated to Colt and the Colt tour, and you are going to see a lot of things that I think that you'll be very interested in. We'll just leave it at that as a teaser for the next episode. So
if you want to contact us, as usual, we have our email, powerfactorshow@gmail.com, the website, powerfactorshow.com, or
what?
Facebook.
It's been so long, Rick, I can't remember.
Well, I can't either. I never knew. I never wanted to know.
Facebook.com/PowerFactorShow.
You knew that was it all along.
Right.
All right. Till next time.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.